Hi, my name is Josh. I own a personal training gym, and for the last decade plus, I've spent over 30 hours a week on the floor training both clients and members. And today we're going to talk about what I call the Four Horsemen of musculoskeletal discomfort. That's what we're going to go with. We're going to talk about four muscle groups or regions that when they get stiff or there is maybe a lack of sort of balance between other regions, they tend to cause musculoskeletal discomfort, but more importantly, tend to cause a diminished range of motion, diminished mobility or flexibility around certain joints. The key thing to remember here is that when we have better mobility, we're not so stiff in certain areas, you're going to be stronger because you're going to be able to train more effectively. You're going to be able to get into better positions, get longer ranges of motion. You're going to be fitter overall because, again, you're going to be able to train more effectively and quite possibly without pain. And you're just going to feel better. Now, this video is not about pain management. It is very specifically about mobility and range of motion. And that's a big thing that comes up when we're trying to do certain exercises is how much mobility do you have? And addressing these four muscle groups seems to give us most of the bang for our buck that we're looking for when it comes to improving range of motion. So the four big muscle groups are the pecs in the front of the torso, the lats on the side and toward the back of your torso, your external rotators and abductors on your hip. That would be sort of, for most people, it's sort of like your side glute area, and then your lower back. We'll start with the two upper body ones. The big things that we notice with the pecs and the lats are, the pecs and the lats are fairly dominant just because of their size in the upper body. So the stiffness that you find between these two muscle groups is going to dictate a lot of what occurs at your arm and at your shoulder. And that can have effects, downstream and upstream as well. So the big thing with the pecs and the lats is that they're both internal rotators. And this prevents us from getting into things like long range of motion chin-ups. Sometimes people will feel the tension when they're at the bottom of a chin-up. One that comes up a lot also is getting into a front rack position. That's a big one. If we're going to do front squat at all, getting into that front rack position is really, really important. Sometimes this can affect your ability to do things like face pulls or other movements where you're going to be externally rotated at the top, and you'll find yourself compensating maybe with your head or something else. And then a big thing here too, especially with the lats, is when we find that there are compensations, maybe with something like an overhead press, you're going to find them at your lumbar spine, which is going to throw things off all the way up and down your body. And the big key here is that since your lats attach down at your lower back, when they get sort of stiff when you're trying to do things over your head, that stiffness will travel down to the lower back and will cause compensations down there so that you can adequately do what you need to do up over your head, up at the shoulder. A big key with pecs and lats is that they're influenced a lot by the position of our thorax and our thoracic spine and rib cage, and then also the position of our scapula, our shoulder blades. So when we're looking at different activities, it might not be that our pecs or our lats are super stiff or maybe a little bit too stiff compared to where they should be. It may be that there are other positional elements, but that would be beyond the extent of this video. It'd just be a little bit beyond this video. So we're just going to talk about stiffness in those two muscle groups. Now, the second half of those four horsemen would be the lower back and the external rotators and abductors at the hip. These two things are pretty closely related because, especially when our lower back is tight and it pulls on our pelvis, it tends to put some of our external rotators and abductors into a shortened position in the first place. And so they're more likely to get stiff in that position if we're not moving a lot. And so something to remember here is that very often fixing lower back issues will also help to alleviate issues with external rotators. There are two separate things going on here that we see really commonly. The first is that when the lower back is really tight and our pelvis has a lot of anterior tilt, or we have trouble getting it into a more posterior tilt, we'll start to experience issues with things like depth on our squats or our ability to hinge at the hips, because we're going to experience limited flexion at the front of our hip. Since our pelvis is already pushed forward a little bit, what that means is that we can't bring our legs up as high toward our torso without literally bumping into the end of our range of motion. Relaxing the lower back is really important for a lot of these lower body movements because it allows us to better orient our pelvis, not just in the sense that it helps, again, alleviate those external rotators and abductors in the lower body, but that it just will allow you to have a little more range of motion and comfortably get a little more out of your movements. For instance, one thing that we see is a lot of times when it looks like there is a deficit of internal rotation at the legs and you're, let's say, not squatting as deep as you think you should be able to, a lot of times what actually is occurring is your pelvis is not in a neutral enough position for that internal rotation to matter in the first place. You won't have enough flexibility because your lower back is so tight or you're in such an extended position. And so if we're talking specifically about the tissue in our lumbar spine, our lower back, those muscle tissues are one of the, what I called Four Horsemen, because stiffness in that area can lead to those compensations and can make it look like we don't have range of motion where we actually do. This is one of the reasons why lifting your heels works so well when you're squatting. You want to squat a little bit deeper because when you lift your heels, you have to reorient your center of gravity to stay over the middle of your foot. And what that means is you actually don't need to lean forward as much, so you don't reach the end of your hip range of motion as quickly, and I hope that makes sense. Now, sort of in the same vein, external rotators can be a problem like I said, external rotators and abductors of the hip, because they do prevent internal rotation to an extent, and so that's another thing that we'll get into when it comes to getting through movements that require hip hinges, is that if we have a lot of stiffness on the outside of our hip, it's very difficult, especially for more complicated movements like bilateral squatting. But it could be deadlifts, it could be squatting, it could be single leg things like lunges or single leg deadlifts. All of these movements can be hindered by stiffness through the outside of the hip, because it doesn't allow your legs to move as freely as they normally would, and so it feels like you have a restriction of mobility. And that's the basic theme with all of these muscle regions and muscle groups, is the stiffness in these four regions makes it feel like you don't have mobility when you probably do. We just need to relax those muscle groups a little bit. So the question is, how do we do it? Well, there are three major ways that we use in here, depending on what muscle group it is and what we're trying to do. The first is foam rolling. Foam rolling seems to help alleviate stiffness. The second thing is good old-fashioned stretching with a little bit of breathing, and then deep positional breathing is the third one that we use a lot. And real quick to summarize, I'm just gonna tell you my favorite things to do for these four muscle groups. So when it comes to the pecs and the lats, I really like rolling the pecs on like a door jamb or a wall with something like a lacrosse ball or some other soft tissue work ball. I really like rolling the pecs like that. I really like rolling the lats on a foam roller, or maybe in this case, we use a PVC pipe a lot, if you can tolerate the stiffness of it. So I like rolling both of them. I do also like stretching both of them. Our favorite way to do lower back, it depends a little bit on the person, but we really like deep breathing for lower back stiffness. We'll do 90-90 hamstring bridges on a wall with deep breathing. Sometimes we'll do a deep squat with a lat stretch. That actually kills two birds with one stone. And sometimes we'll do an all fours quadruped breathing as well. So it just depends on where a person's posture is, but we really like deep breathing for lower back stiffness. And then when it comes to external rotators in the hip, I think the best way is to hit it with a lacrosse ball, maybe do a little bit of stretching. I think rolling them with a lacrosse ball, rolling the glutes with a lacrosse ball is a really good place to start.